No lies, no distortions, just the facts and the truth about issues that matter. Facts First with Christian Esqueda.
Good evening guys, it's a Friday. Welcome to tonight's episode of Facts First. Ako po ang inyong host, si Christian Esquera. Maraming salamat po sa inyong patuloy na pagsuporta sa ating programa and we appreciate all your support, your comments, your suggestions, pati sa mga topics that you think we should discuss, yung mga pressing issues that we should tackle. I read most of them, so maraming salamat po. Keep them coming. So for tonight, meron po tayong pag-uusapan na naman na napaka-importanting topic. But before that, I'd like to greet someone. Special shout out to Professor Rosani Sarile. Siya po ang former chair ng Communication and Journalism Department ng De La Salle University sa Dasmariñas. So nagpapa-shoutout po siya. Pinapasabi lang po niya kanina sa ating kaibigan si Mr. Romel Lopez na nakasama po natin kanina. Okay, so pag-usapan po natin ngayong gabi, meron po kasing pronouncement si Vice President Sara Duterte na siya rin pong umuupo bilang Education Secretary. She made a pronouncement during the recent budget hearing at the House of Representatives saying that if given an additional 100 billion pesos in budget in Department of Education, sabi niya, she would solve the problems of basic education in the Philippines in 6 years. Okay? Parang pamilyar yun. No? Parang nadinig na natin yun not so long ago. No? Yung promise to solve some problems within 3 to 6 months. So yun po yung pag-uusapan natin. Realistic ba yun to solve the problems of basic education in 6 years? So basically, during her term as Vice President and as Education Secretary. So makakasama po natin ngayong gabi. We're very fortunate to have someone very familiar, very knowledgeable about the topic. I'd like to welcome to our program si Miss Love Basillote. Siya po ang Executive Director ng Philippine Business for Education. Good evening, Miss Love, and thank you for joining us tonight on Facts First.
Good evening, Christian. Maraming salamat for having me today.
Okay, so nadinig natin yung pronouncement coming from Vice President Sara Duterte, no? Kailangan lang ng additional 100 billion pesos in budget ang Department of Education for next year. At sabi niya, in 6 years, she would solve the problems in basic education. What do you think of this?
Well, yung pronouncement niya on additional 100 billion, it actually, kasi initially, diba, the request is 710 billion, I think was in the National Expenditure Program. So adding 100 billion actually matches the financial plan that is reflected in the Basic Education Development Plan. Because it's about 800 billion there. So
810 yata, yung additional,
yeah.
yung original request nila.
Right, yeah. So adding 100 billion is actually puts the DepEd's budget on the same funding level that was recommended by experts when we were trying to come up with a plan to solve the learning crisis in the Philippines. So it should have started in 2022 at around 700 billion, and then 2023 800 billion, and then it was going to increase incrementally every year. So in a way, it matches the plan, but as to whether it will really solve the crisis, I'm not so sure. I guess Christian, just like any other problem, we need to know how we can actually know that we've succeeded, right? So what does she actually mean by solving the problem in basic education? What does success look like for her? I'm not sure if she has actually said something concrete about that. So I would be curious as to what she means, to know what she means by success.
And usually pag nasa government nga, dapat may diba? Dapat may measure yung success. Before you can say something is a success, dapat meron kang measure. Dapat quantifiable, no? So basically, yung sinasabi niyang budget ng additional 100 billion pesos, may pinanggagalingan naman, kumbaga may basis, to be fair to her.
Yes. Kasi yun talaga dapat yung spending levels natin, at least to address the learning gaps now, yung mga medyo problema natin because yung napalala na problema because of COVID. So when we were plotting out the financial plan of DepEd, it should be at that level. But as to in that plan though, medyo specified where the money should go.
Mm.
So has she actually? I'm not sure. I didn't get to read all of the coverage of her pronouncement earlier. No, but I'm not. I didn't read anything about her specifically identifying where she will spend the 100 billion. So I would be curious. Kasi it's not enough to say, okay, 800 billion. Saan ba gagastusin? Kasi alam naman natin for the budget of the DepEd, about 80 to 85% of that actually goes to teacher salaries, no?
Mm.
So
PS.
we need to, yeah, so personnel services. So we need to make sure also that yung 800 billion is actually spent on the right things to solve the learning crisis that we have now.
Okay. So, pero ang maliwanag dito, may promise given at least officially by the Vice President who also sits as Education Secretary na kaya daw niya isolve yung problema in 6 years basta mabigyan ng 100 billion additional. For context, I think ang original request kasi ng Department of Education sa DBM during the budget call
Mm-mm.
was 810 billion. And then binawasan by 100 billion ng budget department nung sinubmit yung NEP sa Kongreso ng
Mm,
Malacanang. That's how I understand it, no? So basically, gusto niya
right,
ibalik dun sa original proposal. Eh, ang next question dito, kung sa tingin na, kasi nadinig na rin natin ganyang style during the time of our father, no? To solve the problems
right.
of drugs in 3 to 6 months. At alam naman natin, siya mismo umamin later on, very complicated at hindi niya kaya isolve yun, no? Dito, isa-isahin natin. Ano ba talaga yung most pressing problems? Basic education na lang pag-usapan natin kasi napakalawak ng
Mm-mm.
problema ng education sector. Eh. Basic education, I mean, why is it very difficult to solve these problems? Ano yung mga nakikita mo most pressing?
Yung most pressing actually, and she touched on this, is just resources. Sa sobrang laki ng problema, we've been underspending, no, when it comes to education. So, kung titignan, ipa-plot actually yung PISA scores ng mga countries na
Mm.
nag-participate doon sa PISA, at saka kung magkano yung spending nila per student. Parang ano medyo may correlation positive correlation yung those who spend a lot on their kids, on their students, tend to also do well in the PISA, in the international learning assessments. Yung Pilipinas, mababa yung score natin, mababa din yung spending natin sa per student natin. So per capita spending is low. When you look at international benchmarks for percent of GDP spent in education, hindi tayo ever tumaas ng 4%. But the international standard or benchmark is 6%. So
Mm.
historically, mababa talaga yung investments natin in education. That's, I think, very pressing, and especially now that with COVID, we want to make sure that kids are back to school safe. There are a lot of precautions that need to be put in place. That has additional cost, right? So we need to even invest more in education. So number one is resources. Number two pressing issue is really quality of teachers, and we say this in PBED. We've been saying this in PBED for the longest time. No? There have been a lot of studies already being done in terms of the competencies of our teachers. There was a 2016 study that was done by the World Bank on
Mm.
teacher knowledge in the subjects that they are teaching. And on average, they could only answer 4 out of 10. And simple questions lang yun, ha? Not the more complicated ones. So
Mm.
teacher quality is important. I understand na they're very tired, they're very overworked. So I think we need to really rethink the way we attract, retain, and motivate our teachers also so they can improve learning outcomes. Teacher quality yung pangalawa. Um, Number three, although medyo ano siya, hindi siya talaga directly education. But the other thing na we saw could really improve education outcomes is when you have healthy and well-nourished children. And
Mm.
so, since yung malnutrition numbers natin actually have not improved in a decade, 1 in 3, so 30, like a third of our students or our 5-year-olds are malnourished, and so therefore are not ready to learn. It's very hard, right? So we need to also solve that malnutrition problem if we are to improve education outcomes. So these three, I think, are very pressing and could be potentially solved by having someone like a VP who can bring in other government departments could bring in more resources to education. And I think for the teachers, she kind of understands also the needs there. So perhaps she can, do something about these three pressing things.
Okay, sige, isa-isahin natin, no? Unang-una, resources. Not surprisingly, problema natin resources. Although by law, ang pinakamalaking spending natin sa national budget every year is supposed to be education. And we're actually doing that, no? Pero as you said, kulang
Yes.
pa pala. We're down by
Yes.
2 points, no?
Sa
6% of
percent of
GDP.
GDP.
Oo.
Yes.
Tayo 4%
Sa
of GDP.
Correct. And also, sorry to cut you, but then just in terms of the percent of budget, yung recommended kasi is it should be 20% of the budget. Right
Wow.
now, I think it's the effective percentage lang is mga 16 to 17%. So, of the total budget of government for that year. So, kulang pa talaga. We're not really hitting the recommended global standards for investments in education.
Dito sa lack of resources, saan siya pinaka nakikita in concrete terms? Dito sa basic educational system natin. Yung lack of sufficient resources.
It's a bit funny, but para sa akin, very, and supported kasi siya sa data, kitang-kita is the lack of quality learning resources or textbooks. So, merong international assessment na in-administer noong 2018 and the results were released 2019. It's called CPLM, Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metrics, and they were testing grade 5 students. And in Southeast Asia, there were 6 participating countries. Tayo lang yung pinakamalaking share ng mga students, fifth graders, na naghahati-hati or nag-share ng textbooks. They don't
Mm.
have one is to one. And it's hard because you're teaching basic competencies. So you need to have your own textbook, your workbooks, you can do all your exercises. But if you share it with someone, it's hard, right? It makes it more difficult for you to learn. So in the learning materials, that is very evident. You also see that actually medyo controversial ngayon, 'di ba? There were talks about mother tongue, mother
Mm.
tongue based
Mm.
learning. And same, I think in theory okay siya na policy, pero dahil in terms of learning resources kulang-kulang, kaya hindi din siya natuturo ng tama or hindi siya nagagamit ng tama. So in the learning resources, dun talaga tayo, nakikita talaga natin 'yan sa mga textbooks, sa mga modules.
Mm.
Yan, kita natin yung kakulangan.
Clarify ko lang, doon sa study na yun, ilan yung percent ng mga school children natin sa basic education ang nagsishare ng learning materials? Ilang percent?
Let me pull it up, but it's a significant number of our fifth graders who share textbooks. I
Naghihiraman.
can pull it. Naghihiraman. So kumbaga
Ah.
1:2 or 1:3.
Mm. Ito lang, bago ko makalimutan, no? Kasi tama ka, controversial yung mother tongue instruction. No? May nagtanong sa akin yan before paano yung iba na, kunwari, paano ba yung setup ng mother tongue instruction policy na yan? At paano kung hindi ka naman taga ron sa region na yun and you happen to be studying there?
Yes. So that's a bit tricky kasi for the yung Philippines kasi medyo siya unique in the sense that, for example, hindi na tayo lalayo sa Kulyat Elementary. Sa may Quezon City yata yun.
Quezon City. Quezon City.
Yes, Quezon City. Maraming mga migrants actually from different parts of the country, right?
Mm.
Yung mother tongue na ginagamit nila doon would be Tagalog kasi nasa Quezon City eh. Pero yung
Yes.
mother tongue actually ng mga bata, iba-iba. Hindi lang Tagalog. So,
Yes.
yes, so I think kailangan at least on the policy side, we need to have a honest to goodness assessment. Kung ano ba talaga yung mother tongue ng mga bata and then maybe stream them, 'di ba? Parang make it anong tawag diyan, make a special section. O ito yung mga section ng mga Tagalog speakers, ito yung section ng mga Bisaya speakers. Because anyway, yung hiring naman ng teacher sa DepEd national, I mean, they can move around, right? So we can actually import teachers from other regions if just to make sure that there's one-to-one correspondence between the students' mother tongue and the teacher's mother tongue.
Pag ganon, syempre, dapat adjusted yung teachers na magtuturo, di ba? In the mother tongue. Paano yung textbooks? No? Di ba dapat targeted din?
Correct. Yeah. And so just to go back on the textbooks, yeah, so we have the percentage now. It's 20% pala of our fifth graders share um textbooks. And sino yung kaklasmate natin sa ganyang statistic? Lau PDR.
Wow. Now PDR.
So, I mean, not to
Congratulations
say
sa
that
atin.
yes, exactly. So, yon.
Wait, so teka lang para mas ma-visualize yan. Sorry for asking so many data, no?
No, no problem.
So yung 20% ng fifth graders natin, most likely ilan yun?
Per cohort kasi is about 2 million. So
Mhm.
20% of that would be 400,000.
So ganun karami. Parang ano yan, parang shifting sa classroom. Ito naman, shifting sa books.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
And then can you imagine dahil 'di ba nag-remote learning tayo for 2 years kasi closed yung mga schools natin. Paano kaya yon yung textbooks dinideliver or pinapa. So medyo I can't even
Oo, oo,
visualize
oo,
how
oo.
how it's being done. Yeah.
Mm. So ganun. So nakikita natin siya sa learning materials, no? How about sa classrooms? Problema pa rin ba yung lack of sufficient classrooms, which falls under resources?
Yes, I think for classrooms, there is a lack of classrooms, but it's not just a DepEd issue actually. It's super complicated. Kasi you have classrooms in rural areas that are not congested.
Mm.
There are very few students. But then you have classrooms in urban areas that are very congested. And even if they get the budget to build new classrooms, there's no buildable space.
Mm.
So um so there has to be coordination with LGU, with the LGU, with the DPWH, with the locality also to make sure that there is buildable space. I think kasi we just need to be a bit creative when it comes to addressing the classroom issue. Parang there was actually a study that was done by the Asia Foundation. They were able to kind of track where the classrooms are and which classrooms are congested and whether there is buildable space. Um, I'm sure the DepEd could benefit from having access to that data and actually just kind of channeling their resources better, so that we can really address the classroom congestion. Another solution could be maybe busing. So you bus na lang the kids from kung saan yung malapit na classroom, yung malapit na school sa kanila, dun sa isang school na hindi pa ganun ka-congested. So, I mean, there are other things, but for me, classrooms are not the most pressing issues. I mean, not the most pressing need. Kasi, um, the new way of doing education now is really through flexible
Mm.
hybrid. I don't think COVID is the last crisis we'll ever face. We also experience a lot of typhoons, and learning can happen everywhere. So and I think we're not even really maximizing the benefits of technology, for example. So people our students can learn also online. So I wouldn't make classroom building a priority actually.
Mhm.
And here in PBED, we have a recommendation as well of maybe using the excess capacity in private schools, and then putting public school students there. Kasi marami silang empty classrooms na hindi ginagamit. So that could
Mm.
be another
Okay.
solution. But yeah,
Just
all
to
that to
clarify,
say, I don't see that as a problem.
just to clarify, yung pinag-uusapan natin problema sa basic education, ano pa lang to sa public school system. We're not even talking about the problem sa
Correct.
private sector, no? Tama.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yung marami akong gustong puntahang topic so magtiyagalan tayo.
Go lang.
So ito, yung learning materials, so mukhang mas pressing siya compared sa classrooms as you mentioned. Pero how about the quality of learning materials, yung mga modules? Is that also a big problem? Let's say the quality of content, the accuracy of information being taught to basic education pupils and students.
Yes. Yes, it's very problematic, and I think we need to come up with ways to make sure that there are less mistakes there, or there are less errors. Yung DepEd kasi, although someone might need to verify this, but I baka nagbago lang, baka binago na nila yung policy. But for kasi publishers, they can submit a bid to DepEd even though it even though a textbook, for example, only meets 60% of, or less than 50% pala, of the parang required material. So feeling ko it wastes so much time kasi parang why would you even accept a bid that's only 50% satisfactory? So siguro we need to increase the threshold um before like a textbook publisher can bid for like yeah to develop learning materials. But yon important talaga na hindi lang yung quantity of the learning materials but also the quality of the learning materials has to be very good.
Ito naman, we know that we're still in a pandemic at during at least the first few years, couple of years, talagang ano no, kept at home yung mga estudyante. Ngayon lang talaga sila lumalabas. Let's talk about the impact of the pandemic lockdowns, how it worsened the already persisting problems dito sa ating basic education. Paano nag-worsen?
It worsened by a lot, unfortunately.
Uh,
I laugh because it's actually one of my greatest frustrations as an education advocate. Um, yung pagsara ng mga schools natin for 2 years, hindi ko, I just cannot accept and I cannot understand why we left our schools closed for that long when everywhere else in the world, the first to open was their schools,
mm.
actually, not anything else. You
Tayo
know,
na una
they're
yung
the first.
malls no?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't understand every like data said, that kids are less prone, etc., etc. But anyway, nandito na tayo. So yung question mo
Time out. May
on
sagot ako diyan eh. May sagot ako sa
uh,
question mo eh. Hindi ba economic basically? Kasi tama yung point mo eh. Sa iba, nauuna yung pagbubukas sa mga schools. Kaya we were wondering, bakit pwede na mag-mall, pwede na lumabas yung mga tao, pero bawal pang pumasok sa mga schools, no? And then you were mentioning ano ba yung pinanggalingan data niyan. But I suppose economic
yes,
and decision, di ba?
yeah.
Okay, go
But
ahead. Sorry for cutting you off.
no, I mean just on the economic, since kwentuhan naman on the economic argument, actually that was one of the reasons why other countries opened their schools first, because they want mothers and parents to go back to work. So
Oo.
there has to be a childcare. So yung mga bata nasa school while yung mga parents nasa trabaho. So actually there was an economic argument for the reopening of schools. But anyway, yes, to the worsening of further worsening of our learning outcomes because of the pandemic. Lumala, 'di ba?
Mm.
So there's this measure by the World Bank. They call it learning poverty. So there
Mm.
is learning deprivation and learning deficiency, and so it's a formula. But basically, are kids going to school, and when they're in school, are they learning? And then what is the proportion of of the education or the students who are learning poor, meaning they are not going to school, or they are not learning a lot. And pre-pandemic, our learning poverty was only in the like I think 69%. So it's already very big, right? 69% is already majority are learning poor. But after the pandemic, that number rose to
90 point,
91%.
90.8, no? 91.
90.9. Yes, we rounded it up. So
91.
91%. And that's a lot. It means that 91% of our 10-year-olds cannot read a simple text. Um, and it's a basic literacy issue that's very serious, because if you cannot read, you cannot do math, you cannot do higher order skills, so or higher order thinking tasks,
Oh.
so medyo
Wait.
mahirap.
Sorry. Yan sa World Bank, Learning Poverty Report, ano ba siya
Mm-mm.
heavily affected or heavily a manifestation of the pandemic era education natin? Yun ba talaga yung cause, mainly?
Yes, kasi if you look at the learning, 'di ba sinabi ko may learning
60
deficiency and learning like
uh,
learning
deprivation.
deprivation. Yeah. So learning deprivation kasi it's measured by school open access to schools.
Kumbaga, hindi sila
So
nakapasok.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
And because yung alternatives natin, yung remote, ano yun, yung learning distance learning
Yung
modalities like yung
Alternative
Yun.
learning modalities, yung iba't ibang
Yes, there you go. Yeah,
options.
alternative learning modalities were shown to not have really induced learning, So kaya dumaki talaga yung learning poverty rate natin kasi sinara natin yung schools natin for the longest time. And then yung alternative learning um resources hindi siya talaga nakapag-produce ng learning outcomes.
Oh, yun nga eh. Speaking of the pandemic, ito kasi observation ko as well as anecdotes coming from people I know. Talaga nakita
Mm.
natin yung problema ng educational system natin during the pandemic. There are certain LGUs that adjusted quite better compared to others. Pero yung problema, matindi, no? Especially sa mga remote areas. Kasi they had different options, diba? Iba dinideliver yung mga libro, yung mga modules, sasagutan, ibabalik. Iba naman yung may access sa internet. Eh dito kasi,
Mm.
ang lagi kong iniisip dyan, meron na ba kayong, are you aware of any measure as to the impact of the pandemic lockdown arrangements sa basic education? Kasi nakaka-alarma po yan, di ba? Kung yung mga
Yeah.
bata na nasa basic education, ito yung kinahinatnan nilang situation, magsasanga-sanga po yan, domino effect yan. Nakikita natin
Yes.
later on sa college, di ba? Dito meron ba kinakita measure kung effective ba yung pag-streamline, for example, ng curriculum, di ba? Iniklian nila yan, tapos kung ano yung mga pinapagawa nito sa
Mm.
mga estudyante.
So, wala pang measure kasi hindi pa nila nire-release yung assessment. Dapat in-assess na nila yung learning levels. I think ongoing daw ngayon yung assessment, kakasimula lang din ng school year. So, yung sabi sa amin ng DepEd, they are assessing the students now. So, malalaman natin kung i-compare natin yung assessment scores nila pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Sa hula ko mababa. I mean, there wasn't really that much that they learned during the pandemic. So,
Oo nga eh. Tsaka yung
kahit
ano, yung,
kahit anong modality pa.
oo.
Yeah.
Eh, ingat. Tsaka,
Kasi
tsaka yung baka nagjo-joke, di ba? Baka natuto yung mga parents.
no, exactly. And then yung kasi marami ding parents sa atin, 'di ba, na hindi naman nakapag-graduate ng elementary. So ano naman yung guidance na
Oo.
na
Oo,
ituturo
tama.
nila sa mga anak nila, 'di ba? Tapos yeah, baka natuto sila, nag-ALS na rin sila
Hindi,
habang
parang
nag-aano ng
sila nagbasa eh, di ba?
oo, oo,
Pero yeah, of course, we
oo.
can understand the situation. Di naman natin pwedeng sisihin yung DepEd before dahil they had to make do with what they had at that time. Pero at least that was supposed to be a wake-up call. For example, yung interconnectivity natin, di ba? Yung digital
Yes.
infrastructure natin. Talaga nakita natin yung kakulangan eh. Kasi heavily nag-shift tayo sa digital. Pati economy natin, di ba? Yung mga
Yeah.
gig
Yeah.
economy, yung order natin, di ba? Nakita natin. Kung sobrang bagal ang internet natin, di kawawa yung marami sa atin na hindi makapag-order ng pagkain, di ba?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think no, like those alternative learning options kasi are parang emergency measures, right? So I would get it if year one ganon. Pero 'di ba
Mm.
year two, 2 years, over 2 years tayong nagsara. So,
Mm.
dapat siguro, by year two, natuto na tayo from year one and then in-improve na natin. So, what you were saying about interconnectivity, like, we could have done more to really increase access to the internet, to learning devices. Nag-pilot kami sa PBED. It was funded by, okay ba mag-mention ng partner
Mm.
company namin
Oo,
sa
okey lang.
show
Ano naman,
mo?
independent
Okay.
journalism naman tayo. Wala naman tayong
Okay, okay.
walang big
Okay, yeah.
company may
So,
hawak sa atin. Sa katotohanan lang.
okay. Okay,
Go,
good.
go.
So, yeah, so we partnered with Accenture Philippines.
Oo.
And what we did was we gave tablets to 1,000 Cebuano kids from kinder to grade 3. And we gave in the tablet, meron siyang gamified learning platform to teach them math and reading. And in
Mm.
this platform actually was funded, won the Elon Musk X Prize kasi parang it showed like really significant learning outcomes in kids in Tanzania who had access
Mm.
to this. But going back to that pilot, when we did that, we rolled it out. Plus, we had volunteer education students, BS education students who acted as parang ate kuya tutor, ganyan. They improved their learning outcomes by significant like percentages in math and in reading. So when you have really the resources and you actually give them access to high quality resources plus internet access and all that, natututo yung mga bata kahit yung mga parents hindi na sumusubaybay. And then plus you have your tutor, yung mga para teachers na tinatawag. So that's what I'm saying, right? Like year one, siguro pwede pa yung mga printed modules, yung mga radio, yung mga ganyan. Pero siguro pag year two, we can already up the game, 'di ba? Up the
Mm.
ante when it comes to like standards of learning materials that we're giving out to our students.
Okay. Ito, we interrupt this very interesting conversation to read the comment coming from a troll. His name is George Rakuya. Mukhang totoong tao naman siya, pero yung behavior niya troll. Sa ganda ng
Ay,
pinag-uusapan natin, love, biglang may mga ganito, no? Mga dilawan na media na naman mga ito. Tarantado yung Christian na yan. Salot yan sa lipunan.
ay grabe.
Sa- Salot sa lipunan yata. Mali yung nang, no? So, pati Filipino grammar mo, mali-mali. Mukhang ikaw yung manifestation ng pinag-uusapan namin problema sa Philippine basic education, eh, no? So, I don't
Learning
know kung
poverty.
learning poverty or intellectual poverty meron na itong tao na to, eh, no? So I don't know why people like this would comment this way for something very pressing and important like this. We're not even talking about politics, no? So ito, isang
Right.
manifestation yan kung bakit may mga taong ganyan mag-isip. Siguro, biktima
Mm-mm.
rin sila ng hindi magandang basic education, no? Yung sa mga hindi nakakaintindi ko, ako very passionate ako rito sa issue ng basic education. Ako po kasi nagtuturo sa college, third
Mm.
year, tsaka fourth year. Pero usually, hulma na yun eh. That's a professional course, journalism, political journalism and ethics. Pero dito, ang hirap magturo sa basic education kasi foundation po lahat yan. Eh. So maturuan ng maling grammar, maling good manners and right conduct yung mga tao, kalalakahan nila yan. Eh. So mukhang ito si George. Kumusta ba yung basic education mo kaya ganyan ang asal mo ngayon? Ayan. Okay, sorry in-interrupt ko lang kasi dito sa space na to, we give prominence sa mga stupid comments na ganyan para hindi na pamarisan. Okay. Nasa na ba tayo?
Yes, on I think learning materials or no, yeah, like the like LGUs having different responses and whether na test na ba natin kung gumana ba sila o hindi.
Oh,
So,
inga. Yung mga LGUs kasi, understand, they were quick to respond to that, especially those with budgets, no? So, they
yeah.
provided yung mga tablets, yung mga laptops. Pero iba, they couldn't afford that. Ang problema,
Mm-mm.
paano yung uniformity ng ganyan, di ba? Ako, yun ang una kong tinatanong dati, especially early during the pandemic, because there were different modalities available to students.
Yeah.
Paano kung half of the class wanted to have their modules delivered to them, iba naman willing to view videos, no? Paano yung leveling ng education ng uniformity? Baka naman hindi sila pare-pareho nung natututunan.
Yeah. Well, actually, in education naman, hindi naman same talaga tayo na natututunan, 'di ba? Kahit sa isang classroom, parang may iba na mas mabilis matuto, may iba na hindi gano'n kabilis matuto. Pero to your point about differentiation, so siguro at the level of LGU muna before we go to the classroom level. Kaya kaya inaano din namin parang pinupush din namin tong idea ng decentralization. Parang hindi kasi pwedeng one size fits all, 'di ba? Kasi
Oo.
ang dami-dami nating isla, ang dami-dami nating mga LGU, probinsya, iba-iba naman ng konteksto. During sa COVID, 'di ba? Kahit dun sa like at the height of the COVID pandemic, there were provinces that had zero COVID cases. So, and then we still closed those schools and we still, kept the kids indoors. Um so I think we could have done better. We could have weathered the crisis better or the pandemic better had we given more authority and autonomy to local governments to determine what learning modality is better for them, 'di ba? Or
Mm.
what works for them. Kasi hindi naman lahat pare-parehas.
Oo.
Now at the school, yeah, and now at the school level, may iba-ibang ano yan strategies. So, in other contexts, like for example, in India, there was this study that was done on how to improve reading in early grades. And one of the questions that they wanted to ask was whether streaming students based on learning levels. So fast learners and slow learners were grouped into different parang classrooms, and then yung teachers din nila differentiated. So sa mga slow learners, they were given teachers who were really, like focused on just improving that, getting them to a higher level. And then yung isang teacher naman, yung sa mga fast learners, medyo they were just trying to make sure that, the kids continue to be engaged. So, nag-work siya. Naka-catch up yung mga slow learners sa mga fast learners kasi stream nila. But that's just one school strategy, right? I'm not sure if the DepEd can do that, given that everything needs to be decided from the central
Yeah.
level, right?
Mm.
So better siguro din, and other than the decentralization to the LGU level, I think we also need to give more autonomy to our principals, to our school leaders, to determine
Mm.
also what sort of strategies they can employ, no, to improve learning in their schools.
Mm.
Pero kasi, Christian, mangyayari lang yan if may transparency tayo on actually the level of learning in the
Mm.
school. Yung problema kasi, wala tayong datos kung ano ba talaga yung learning outcomes at the school level. So,
Oo.
siguro, kailangan nating mag-assess talaga kung ano na ba talaga yung level ng education or lang ng yung pagkatuto ng mga estudyante natin.
Oo. Maganda binabanggit ni Love yung ano, no, yung datos. Dito po sa mga nakikinig, ang gobyerno po kasi hindi po dapat nag-i-implement ng kahit anong policy na hindi po backed by data. Kasi hindi pwedeng sabihin mo, ito gusto kong pulisiya, pero ano yung basis nyon? Dapat may numero ka, meron kang datos. So sa DepEd, total, napakalaking problema yung pinag-uusapan natin at napakalaking pondo yung pinag-uusapan natin. Kahit sabi ni Love, kulang pa nga ano, hindi pwedeng mag-implement ng kahit anong polisiya na hindi maliwanag kung ano yung pinanggagalingan na datos. Kanina nabanggit mo rin highly centralized yung ating setup in DepEd. Mukhang totoo, no? Kasi devolved ng educational system natin sa totoo lang, pero highly centralized pa rin, no? Tama ba?
Yes, yes.
So, would you advocate for further devolution? And ano yung nakikita mong hulma nun kung sakali? Pakitagalog pala, nahirapan akong tagalogin yung devolution para sa mga katulad ni George. Kanina.
Yes, hindi ko rin alam kung ano yung Tagalog ng devolution kasi Bisaya ako.
Um,
May plausible ako, may excuse.
Parang
Um,
mas mabawasan yung control mula sa sentro, mas bibigyan ng responsibilidad,
Kapangyarihan at yes,
kapangyarihan,
yes.
at presumably resources. Yun pong
Yes.
mga nasa rehiyon, nasa mga probinsya. Yeah.
Yes. So, para sa akin, isang ano niyan, isang kumbaga model niyan would be siguro we group them in regions kasi may mga ano naman tayo regional clusters, 'di ba? There are, I think, 17 or 18 regions in the Philippines.
Mm.
Per region would then sila dapat siguro yung mag-decide kung ano yung pag-deliver ng education sa kanilang rehiyon, papaano nila iti-test yung learning levels ng mga bata, and then paano, also very critical actually yung hiring and well, wala pala tayong firing of teachers. Kasi dito sa Pilipinas, kapag naging teacher ka na, forever, lifetime na yan, unless
May security
mag-resign
of
ka on your
tenure.
own.
Oo.
Yes, yes. So, but teacher policy, yung DepEd kasi merong policy ngayon on para teachers or hindi siya substitute teachers pero yung mga teachers na pwedeng tumulong sa mga licensed teachers, I think pwedeng ma-expand yan, but the regions can actually decide on that.
Parang
Pero
teaching assistants?
critical,
Ganun ba yan?
yes,
Teaching
exactly,
assistants?
teaching assistants. But I think, Christian, yung critical piece ng devolution, no, would really be um the schools having more control over their MOE. Right
Mm.
now kasi there was a 2013 study on education resources delivery that was funded by the Australians but published by the World Bank. And they saw that about 23% of the money gets lost. MOE money gets lost from national down to the school. So, kumbaga, one-fourth, almost one-fourth ng pera na dapat nasa school, nawala na
Hindi
siya along the
nakakarating.
way.
Saan?
Oo.
Sa corruption
Nawala.
or what? Saan nawawala?
Yeah, corruption or maybe parang delays in bureaucratic delays, yung mga
Explain
ganyan.
ko lang, Love, sa mga nanonood, baka hindi sila familiar sa term, no? Kasi yung budget po may iba't ibang parts. PS, MOE, tsaka capital outlay. So, yung PS, ito po yung personal services, ito po yung sweldo. MOE, maintenance and other operating expenses. mga pambili ng mga school supplies, diba? Lahat-lahat yan. And then
Yes.
capital outlay, mga infrastructure po. Ayan.
Yes. So, yung MOOE, yeah, almost one-fourth hindi na nakakarating sa school. Tapos, napupunta pa siya sa mga schools na marami na talagang resources.
Mm.
Hindi, yung mga kulang talaga ng resources, hindi pa talaga nakakarating sa kanila. So, more control over their own budgets would be a concrete manifestation of that. Na hindi na dadaan sa napakalaming level kasi na ano na siya, na devolve na siya. And then I think important dito, and I guess going back to my earlier point, no, na how do we know we have succeeded? Dapat talaga ina-assess yung mga learning levels and then per region, and then we compare. Para we
Mm.
know, etong rehiyon na to, ang galing, oh, napa-improve nila yung learning outcomes nito, oh. Ano kaya yung ginagawa nilang tama? And then baka
Na
pwedeng
pwedeng
kopyahin na
i-adapt.
lang ng iba. Yes, yes, sa ibang region. So, yung mga ganyan, we need transparency in the data kasi para malaman natin ano yung gumagana, ano yung hindi, and then ano yung pwedeng i-adapt, ano yung dapat siguro i-drop na natin kasi hindi
Mm.
gumagana. Yung
Sa
mga
ganyan
ganyan.
ba may budget naman tayo siguro, no? For assessments?
Meron
O pati yun
budget
problema?
assessment. Pero problema siya kasi historically hindi consistent yung pag-administer natin. Pabago-bago din yung methodology. So wala tayong longitudinal tracking. So actually one of the things that we are pushing for is an independent assessment agency. So hindi na siya nakakabit. I mean, connected pa rin siya sa DepEd kasi yung DepEd naman yung gumagawa ng curriculum. Pero siguro one model would be answerable sila to the president kasi yung assessment agency, they make the data public in many countries that already exists, like in
Mm.
South Korea, in Australia, countries that do well, no, in their education system. So baka pwede nating kopyahin na lang kasi gumagana naman sa ibang lugar, baka gagana din sa atin.
Oo. Bago ko ituloy yung ano, pag-usapan naman natin ano, next yung quality of teachers, yung problem, no? Pero bago yun, naisip ko
Sure.
kasi, may mga nagko-comment dito na sinasabi nila wala raw alam si Sara Duterte sa education. Ako naman, we can also look at it from the other perspective, eh, no? Hindi nyo ba na-imagine na pag ang vice president, siya yung kumuha ng isang portfolio or cabinet position, ibig sabihin, mas may additional suasion yan at the very least, may additional power, at mas less po or less ang chance po na mag-fail compared to when that particular department is headed by just another alter ego of the president who is a cabinet secretary. Kasi the fact na vice president yung umupo dyan, ano yan, that sends a message. Kasi pag nag-fail yan, mapapahiya dyan si Sara Duterte. Hindi lang si President
Yeah.
Duterte, di ba? Ikaw, do you also see it that way?
Actually, I agree with you 100%. Maybe I'm naive, I don't know what, but when she was appointed, first the fact that symbolic yun, na the first portfolio that had a secretary, cabinet secretary, was education. So I was already feeling a bit hopeful no na, oh sige, finally bibigyang pansin yung education.
Mm.
And then no less than the vice president pa yung ginawang education secretary. So for me, it's like we already have so many good policies in place. We already
Mm.
know what works and what doesn't. Yung problema lang natin talaga, yung pinakamalaking problema talaga natin sa Pilipinas, ang execution.
Yeah.
And to just get things done. And education, unlike our traditional perspective, which is, oh, education lang, textbooks lang yan, schools, teachers lang yan. Actually, education is connected to so many things. It's about health, yung sinabi kong nutrition kanina. It's about social protection kasi pag kunwari inabuso yan sa bahay, hindi na yan papasok sa paaralan or
Mm.
no magda-drop out na yan. So you have all of these different agencies or different sectors in our society na konektado sa education, na kung education secretary na normal lang na yung portfolio niya education lang, baka hindi niya makumpas yung ibang department secretaries, or hindi niya not kumpas, but hindi niya she or he can't ask the other secretaries to do whatever needs to be done, right? But here you have a
Mm.
vice president who technically can ask other, in the hierarchy of officials, she's higher than the other cabinet secretaries. So she
Oo.
could really ask DSWD, hey, can we maybe work well together so that early childhood care and development is fixed? Or
Oo.
DOH, like, hey, can we make sure that the first 1,000 days program gets implemented? So parang ganon. So in a way, I am with you on that. I take it as a positive thing that she is not an education person who seems to be, like very interested in education. Make or break sa kanya to sa tingin ko ha. Kasi vice
Mm.
president ka, you have all the power there, you have all the resources at your disposal. So,
Mm.
dapat lang mag-succeed ka talaga.
Kaso naman ito valid din naman yung tanong ng mga iba 'no, kailangan ba ng intelligence fund ng Department of Education?
Honestly, for me, I don't think so. Um, because I have never encountered in my research a country where you have a Ministry of Education or a department secretary who was given intelligence funds. Um, unless I don't know, like maybe if we I was joking up with my parents kanina, sabi ko, oh baka intelligence funds magiging intelligent yung mga tao given the fund. But anyway, that was kind of like a lame joke. But
Pampatalino?
oo, pampatalino fund. But yeah, I don't agree. I think there are a lot of more pressing issues that need to be funded. Um, so baka naman we can just, that's what I was saying earlier, right? It's not just
Oo.
about the amount. It's about how we spend it and where we spend it on.
Okay. Ito naman yung second problem ng quality of teachers 'no. So far ba ano ba yung teacher-student ratio natin sa public school, basic education? Would you know?
I don't know the latest data but from what I know, it's already 1:35.
Is that
Um,
closer to the recommended or ideal?
yes, it's but this was my data was pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic.
So yeah,
Okay.
that's pre-pandemic data. I don't know what the teacher ratio is now. But yeah, actually it was I think global standard is about 1:30 eh. So
Mhm.
where we were
Hindi
kind of
naman
like
sobrang
approaching.
layo. Okay.
Hindi na,
Pero
oo,
yung
oo.
ano yung pinaka-cause ng problema when it comes to quality of teachers? Ano yung pinaka nagiging cause nito? Training ba or resources din for them?
So unfortunately, it starts with where they were coming from, right? So if you look at pre-service, it starts with pre-service. Pre-service teacher education, it means yung mga nagka-college pa lang, yung BS education pa lang, yung naghahanda pa lang to become teachers. So that's what you call pre-service training. If you look at the quality of our teacher education institutions or TEIs, yung mga BS education schools, ang daming hindi maganda yung quality, right? So, if you look at the licensure passing rate, for example, ang daming mga TEIs na zero passing rate. Meaning, sa mga ginagraduate nila, wala talagang pumapasa sa licensure exam. If you look at the national passing rate, um, less than 40% yata yung national passing rate on teachers. So even at the pre-service level, we already don't have good quality teaching or training in at the pre-service level. Dadagdagan mo pa yung anecdotal data non that teacher education seems to be kind of like a safe choice. Yung tipong, hindi ako pumasa sa engineering, sige, mag-teacher na lang ako. Para lang maka-college ako. It's also one of the cheapest courses. So, I'm not sure whether they're really equipped to be teachers. I think it should be in successful models abroad. The it's really they are really attracting the best and brightest. Only the best and brightest can become teachers. I'm not sure if we have that concept here in the Philippines or that's happening in the Philippines.
Mm.
Now moving on to oh
Sige,
sorry,
go,
go
go,
ahead.
go, go,
You
go.
were
Sige,
gonna
sige.
yeah. And then, so that's pre-service, right? So you have a throughput problem, not the best and brightest going in. And then the system itself, there's also quality issues. And then, secondly, in the in-service, so kung teachers na sila, right? Um, they are they are probably not trained in the subjects they are teaching. So, marami dyan, I don't know, nagtuturo ng physics when yung major nila sa college, physical education, for example. May mga ganang anecdote. So, like, yung correspondence ng ano yung training nila and ano yung tinuturo nila, hindi din ganon kaakma. And then obviously I think this one is being discussed now a lot is administrative burden. So we ask a lot from our teachers. They are tired. They are not only really asked or expected to deliver the curriculum or teach the curriculum, they're also asked to do all these other administrative things. And so they cannot really focus on what they should be doing, which is to teach. So, and then yung mga in-service training natin then hindi din gano'n kaganda, hindi din gano'n ka-effective. So yeah, that's what's happening in the in-service system in the
Okay.
Philippines for teaching.
Sige.
Yeah.
So, napakaraming problema, no? And I hope na-cover natin yung most of them, no? Maraming salamat sa iyo, Love, for joining us tonight. And I hope naging useful yung discussion natin dito sa mga nakikinig at mga nanonood. Maraming salamat sa iyo and thank you for joining us on Facts First.
Thank you for having me. Have a good evening and have a good weekend ahead.
Salamat. Okay, so yan po ang ating episode for tonight. Maraming salamat po for joining us tonight on Facts First. See you again on ano ba ngayon? Today is Friday, no? See you again on Monday sa Facts First. Maraming salamat po.